السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. The surah I just recited was Surah Al-Asr. Wal-Asr, Allah swears to you by time. Innal insana lafi khusr. Indeed, man is in clear loss. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Except those who believe, do good, counsel one another of the truth, and counsel one another of patience. And really, these four qualities are the establishment of where our identity is. And when you look at time itself, time is changing. Every 10 years, the way people think, the way society's norms are, every year it's changing drastically. And so now, the school year is starting up again, 2022 to 2023. And so we must be aware of the current situation, especially what is being taught in schools to our children today. And one of the most foundational things is that as parents, is that you must understand what's going on. In previous khutbahs, I've talked about two major crises that are happening. One is the Muslim identity, and the second one, it follows off of it, is balancing your identity with your Western culture here. And so, when I was growing up, a lot of the challenges in society were not to do drugs, dating, etc., right? Things that the school preached against doing. And now the issues that our children face are on a completely different level. And today they're being taught that your identity, who you are, male, female, your sexuality, what you want to believe in, what you want to say, it's all up to you. And the scary thing about this is that the schools are promoting this at a very young age. I'll give you an example. Imam Kaiser from Rutgers, he's the chaplain for Rutgers University. He said in one of his previous khutbahs that his daughter came up to him one day, and she's in kindergarten. And she said, to him, she's like, we started learning about the genderbread person. Have you heard of the gingerbread man? You've heard of that, right? But she says that we learned something about the genderbread person. So he's like, what's the genderbread person? And essentially what they have kids doing in kindergarten is assembling cookies and houses and all that, but also teaching them about gender queer, your gender expression, biological sex, and your sexual orientation. You can Google this, genderbread person. And it's being taught right in New Jersey. And believe it or not, but Rutgers has a huge Muslim population. Edison, New Brunswick, South Brunswick, all those areas have a huge Muslim population. So if that can be taught in those schools with a dense Muslim population, what do you think is going to happen in Morris County today? Realistically, if your kids are being taught who the genderbread person is, another example, the gender unicorn, right? They're talking about gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, who you're physically attracted to, emotionally attracted to men, women, or other. And look, I even have a diagram here for you. Look how cartoonish and simple this looks. Kids resonate to these type of things. And this is not something that's hidden. You Google this, you'll find it immediately. You'll find multiple articles, multiple schools that are following this. And look, a 5-year-old that doesn't even know how to tie their own shoelaces is being taught that you can be a boy or girl, whatever you want. And how outrageous is this? And I'll give you an example. In Virginia, Fairfax teachers, this is a county in Virginia, teachers are being trained to transition children's genders without parental approval. This is on the news. It just happened last week. Teachers are telling children or training them to transition without parents even knowing it. This is very real. And there are many states in the United States right now, especially the southern states like Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Florida, that are refusing these laws to be passed. They're strictly against it, especially at such a young age. And so how does New Jersey fall into this? What is New Jersey's position on the whole LGBTQ educational system? How is it being incorporated in today's curriculum? And so this article was published by yy.org, and this was just a few months ago in April. And so it stated that last week the New Jersey Department of Education released documents clarifying its role and implementing the LGBTQ curriculum. The document stated by the end of second grade, students are expected to discuss the range of ways people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. At the end of second grade, there's a target that they must understand what gender fluidity is, different types of genders, how you express yourself. By the end of fifth grade, students would be expected to explain common human sexual development and the role of hormones, i.e. romantic and sexual feelings, mood swings, timing of puberty, etc. And then for those students that are in high school, they would be expected to know how to define different types or different forms of sex, which is insane. That this is being approved by the Department of Education. And you can find this online right now. Go to yy.org and put in LGBTQ curriculum or in Google. And you'll see the letter that the Department of Education, what they shared. It's an actual full letter. And all schools in New Jersey must somehow develop their curriculum around this. Now, the Department of Education does not tell them exactly what curriculum to use. It is based on the school. It's the school's decision on how they want to implement it. So there is some, I would say, gray area in this. So it's not like it's being mandated at a very strict level. It's very lenient, but depending on your town, your school system, your principals, whoever they are, they're the ones that help make the final say. And so the reason I tell you about this is because being a parent today, you have to be more involved in your kids' lives than ever before. You have to be so involved in where your kids are learning, who they're hanging out with. And it doesn't mean you micromanage their lives, but you understand who they are, what is being taught to them specifically. And so you can have an input in this before it's too late. And so when we vote for people like Murphy, right, who approved this bill in 2019, and now they're going to enforce it more so, we have to be aware of what's going on, who we're voting for, what policies do they want to, implement. So these are other things outside of just what happens in the home that we must be concerned with. We must be fully aware of what's happening in politics, how that's going to influence ourselves, our children, our jobs, etc. Number two, in order to combat this, there's a two-step approach. In order to combat this new education system, obviously one is that you can be very vocal, right, with the support of your community. You can gather around, you can understand what the teachers are teaching, you can directly go to the school, you know who the Muslim parents are that go to your school, etc. And start understanding what's being taught and speak up for yourselves and speak up for your children. But what happens or the relationship between you and your children is even more important. Because guess what? Their whole life, they're going to be faced with challenges. What's okay today was not okay 10 years ago. Nobody would have even batted an eye thinking about this subject. But now, it's okay. And 10 years from now, the ideology is going to change drastically again. So times are going to change. People are going to change what they think is right versus wrong, etc. But the thing is that we have to instill in our children and ourselves what our moral identity is. What does it mean to be Muslim? Who am I? And so, the first thing is that we need to increase communication in the household. And then the second advice is for the children and the parents on not being, or as Muslims, we need to be unapologetic of who we are. So the first one, how do you increase the communication between you and your children, right? Because imagine Imam Kaiser, his daughter never came up to him. And she was learning about the gender-bred person and the gender unicorn and all these things that I shared earlier in the khutbah. Imagine she was learning this for 2-3 years, didn't share that with her father. How much influence could he have at that point? Very little. So one, you need to understand that there must be a base, there must be a foundation where you can interact with your children. And listen, I know growing up, and a lot of, the parents in here growing up, you might have not had the most open communication, the most open dialogue with your parents. You weren't telling them everything that was happening in your life because at the end of the day, our parents faced a different struggle. Their struggle was coming to this country, establishing a foundation, getting you through school, basically survival mode. But now we're in a position where we have income coming, our parents have already developed the groundwork for us to be comfortable. Now we have to understand that this communication with our children has to be even more impactful today. You cannot raise your children in this country thinking the way that your parents taught you is gonna result in the same thing, like your kids are gonna come out just the way your parents taught you. No, it's not gonna happen. Because you must adapt and change to your environment. If you do not do so, your kids will be, endorsing LGBTQ one day. Or they'll be endorsing the next big, social norm. Whatever it is. Because you never had that open dialogue with them. So how do you get engaged? Last year, Ustadh Numali Khan, he came during the Surat Al-Kahf series. And during that series, at the end of the series, he would have a Q&A. Now, what's unique about this Q&A is that nobody asked him questions about Surat Al-Kahf. Right? They only asked him questions that had, to do with society and things. And one very interesting question that was posed to him, and they said that, Ustadh, it's so hard to engage with our kids today. Especially, and this is at the height of the pandemic, students were on their computers, instead of in their classrooms. And so he brought up a good way to engage with our children. He says, ask them what prompt questions. Ask them prompt questions. PROMPT, prompt questions. You can Google this, different types of prompt questions. Essentially, the purpose is, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about what's going on in, Ukraine? How do you feel about what's going on in Pakistan right now? How do you feel about global warming? How do you feel about this whole LGBTQ stuff? You're asking them questions to get them to think and to express themselves to you. Now, as parents, this is super critical, because once you've established that familiarity, that you can speak to me about anything, this is where the role of Islam comes in. Because as parents, we have the biggest responsibility of giving dawah to our children first. And so we must help them navigate their emotions, as I mentioned in previous khutbahs about emotional intelligence. Picking up on how our children are feeling, understanding what they're trying to say in between the lines. And you know what? If you haven't done this, it's okay. Because this is what Islam is all about. Islam is all about constantly learning. Allah tells you to come to the Jumu'ah prayer. So what? You can purify yourselves. So you can remind yourself of Allah. So yes, if you're hearing this, and you haven't followed it, it's okay. Right? From now on, it's up to you to establish that open dialogue, that open communication in your house. And if your kids see that change in you, that positive change, will they not be more compelled to follow this religion? If they say that if my father or my mother can take in information from a khutbah and they can be moved, just like the Sahaba were moved, then of course this has to be the right system. This has to be the right religion. So open dialogue gives opportunity to understand what our kids are learning, what they're thinking, what they're seeing, so we can be better engaged with their day-to-day actions. Number 2, this also goes into parent-children relationships, is that the fact that we don't read anymore has had deep and profound effects on our society. As people in America today, we don't read. We read maybe a 2-paragraph article, that's it. Nobody picks up books. Qurans, there's a common stereotype, right? That Qurans are on displays in houses, but they're never read. Books are just there, but nobody's touching them. And there's a study in the United States that they did talking about the importance of reading at home, like parent, children reading together. And they said that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, on average, parents used to read with their children 60 minutes a day, even more. 60 minutes, 1 hour at least every single day. Over the years, since the dot-com era, since the 2000s, that reading between the parent and the children, it has decreased from 60 to 40, 30, 10, 0 on a daily basis. Now it's done maybe 10 minutes a week, maybe. And what's so remarkable about this is that the first revelation that came to the Prophet ﷺ was what? Iqra, read, recite. And we've lost the very first words. And this is not just us as a Muslim community. This is the United States. This is another way on how we can get engaged with our kids, that we must start reading. We must start giving the importance of self-education at the house. We must understand that reading is one of the most blessed things that Allah has given us. Because without reading, how are we going to progress? We force our kids to learn in schools, etc., take all these tests, but yet we don't want to do that at home, right? We feel as though maybe we've evolved out of this, need to learn, but this is super important. And you know what? This is something that, especially parents today, you must read with your children. You must be a teacher to them. Because if you're not a teacher, growing up, they will not respect you. They will not respect your decisions, because they will say, you have never read in your life. You've never created that transparency between us. All we did at home was just stay on our phones, play our video games, etc. And nowadays, what? Screen times are 5-6 hours a day, but reading time is 0 minutes a day. And so, going back to it, the first thing we mentioned were prompt questions. How to engage with your family members, how to engage with your siblings, how to engage with your children, your parents, etc. And this is not just a message for the parents, right? This is a message for the children too. You must do your best as well. It's not entirely up to the parent. And so, and then, as I mentioned, the last thing is phones. We must have a control on what our kids are doing with their phones. I'm telling you right now, pornography is one of the biggest crises in Muslim households today. Pornography is one of the biggest crises in Muslim households today. I have met numerous people who have told me the struggles they have with this addiction. And this is so rampant and so easily accessible. It's $1 billion industry. right? And so when kids get engulfed in this type of stuff, then this whole LGBTQ stuff becomes so easy for them to adopt. I'm telling you right now. It makes it easy. It makes it okay. It makes it seem normal. And so the reason I'm telling you this is that you can actually contact your network provider, and you can put restrictions on your networks, on your cell phone, on your cellular data. You can put restrictions on what times during the day internet is available. You can put restrictions on their phones on what time during the day that they can touch their phones. These are all things that come into play in bettering our relationship with our children. Because why? How are we going to ever focus on them when they're on their phones, we're on our phones, we're not reading, we're not interacting, we're not asking, thoughts of that encourage critical thinking in the house. So all these things factor in. Now the second part of it, so the first part was having that open dialogue, that open engagement with our children, right? Because I showed you earlier that there are things that will be taught in terms of LGBTQ to kindergarten students. By second grade, the Department of Education has given a requirement to students. And I repeat this, by the end of second grade, students must discuss the range of ways people express their gender, and their gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. This is something they must learn by the end of second grade. By the end of fifth grade, students are expected to explain common human sexual development and the role of hormones and relationships and feelings. And by high school, they should have full knowledge of different forms of sex. This is in the letter by the Department of Education. And so, going back to this, now, as Muslims, right, as parents, you can only do so much. As parents, you can't hold their hands forever. That's fact, right? You can't hold Ali's hand forever. You can't hold your son's hand forever. You can't always be with them. And so now this advice comes to the children. And this is to be unapologetic Muslims. In society today, it's really strange. You cannot say there's this hypersensitive environment where you speak out for your beliefs, but you're criticized for them because you don't value what somebody else values, or you see reality or our perspective is different than somebody, and then you're mocked for being called narrow-minded, right? You are people who are uneducated, so on and so forth, people who are rude, whatever, arrogant. And what's crazy is that when Muslims speak up for themselves, they're told to be quiet. Nobody cares about your feelings, right? Just look at what's happening in Pakistan, right? What a crisis. In Palestine, crisis. But the news doesn't care. But they care about Ukraine so much more, right? Billions of dollars are being funded to that country. But when it comes to Muslim feelings, nobody cares. So what I'm telling you right now is, as Muslims, we must be unapologetic, because it is who we are. We do not bend just to make other people happy. And I'm going to explain this. But as being unapologetic Muslims, there are two things. You must establish your identity at home, and you must establish your identity at school. But why is the home more important? Because you don't want to be dawah warriors. You want to be somebody who your family sees first, because this is the most important thing. Your impact on your family. And so, as children, I'm telling you, the biggest thing you have to honor in your household is trust. Trust with not just Allah, but with your parents. Because when they send you out, they are trusting you to make the right decisions when they're not there. And I've met friends who've told me, my parents, they had never let me out. And so because of that, and this is back in college, and they used to tell me, today, I'm dorming at college, I have no restrictions, I'm going to go out, I'm going to party, I'm going to do whatever I need to do, right? And now looking back on it, it's crazy. I say to myself, this is what parents were so worried about. This is what they were so worried about. They wanted to establish this trust. But look, there's a reason why parents are hesitant on giving you the keys to the car. Because there is so much you don't know. There's so much you don't know. Your parents have lived through it. They've seen it. They've experienced it. They know what's right and wrong. And so for the children in this room, I'm telling you, trust your parents. There's a dua in the Quran where the parents, or Allah tells us to make this dua. رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. You say, oh Allah, give me a gift from my spouses and my children so that they are the coolness of my eyes, right? And so coolness of my eyes is what? When I see them, I treat them as though like they're my relaxation during the day. When I see them, I have immense love for them. But on the contrary, for children, when we recite this dua, we must ask ourselves, are we the burning sensation for our parents' eyes? Are we the ones that rip the coolness out of their eyes? Is that who we are? And the reason I bring this up is because being unapologetic Muslims, you must understand your identity and you must have trust in your parents. And even if your parents are not Muslim, even if you converted, Allah says in the Quran, you must be kind to them regardless. So your identity at home shapes who you are outside of the house first. And so, the second thing is, how do you establish your identity at school? Right? Because now that you've understood who you are, you have this open dialogue with your parents, you're more comfortable being a Muslim. How do you engage with people at school? Well, I'm going to tell you one thing, that Muslims have always stuck out. They've always been called the weirdos at school. The Prophet ﷺ was known as as-Sadiq Amin, right? The most truthful and the most honest. You know, when he first gave the public dawah in the early stages of the Meccan revelation, he went out to a mountain and he called his family and a lot of the leaders of the tribe. And he asked them, if I told you that there was an army behind this mountain, if I told you there was an army behind this mountain, would you believe me? And they said, yes. If this message came from you, we would believe it without even thinking twice. Because that's how honest and true and trustworthy you are. Your character is of excellence. You are somebody that will never lie to us. And then he says, well, guess what? He tells them, I've come to give you a message that's even more scary than an army behind this mountain. I've come to tell you that there's a day of judgment, on a day where everybody will have to answer to Allah. And he explains to them dawah. And after that, what do they say to him? They say, you're the biggest liar on this planet. Called him a liar. 2 seconds ago, they said that we would go to war. If you told us there was an army behind this mountain, we're going to go to war with you. And then when he introduces the message of Islam, what happens? They start calling him a liar. And the Prophet ﷺ was the best person ever. You cannot find a single story about the Prophet ﷺ where he didn't treat people with excellence. His ihsan with people was on a different level. But yet he had to stay firm. And so, the realization of this is that our tone should not be harsh. Like I said, the Prophet ﷺ, he was known for how soft he was. But realize the Quran is harsher in its tone. And the reason I mention this to you is that Allah speaks to His servant the way Allah wants to. Allah knows how the servant will receive the message. It's not our job to go out and being unapologetic does not mean you go and criticize other people. It doesn't mean you go belittle people, you're arrogant, you're rude to them. No, because we learn from the Sunnah that we have to be kind and loving to people. If we can't do that, then there's no point of spreading our message. Allah will teach His servants the way Allah wants to, but it's our job to be kind. But we do not bend, right? And I'll give you an example. In Surah Al-Kahf, the opening ayats are Alhamdulillahi alladhi anzala ala abdihi al-kitaba wa lam yaj'al lahu iwaja. All praises for Allah who has revealed the book to His servant without any crookedness in it. This book has perfect guidance for you. And then in the second ayat, Allah continues, قَيِّمًا لِيُنْذِرَ بَأْسًا شَدِيدًا مِنْ لَدُنْهُ وَيُبَشِّرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ الَّذِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ الصَّالِحَاتِ أَنَّ لَهُمْ أَجْرًا حَسَنًا. And Allah says, and we have made it perfectly straight, perfectly upright, to warn the disbelievers of a severe torment from Him, to give good news to the believers who do good, and with them is a fine reward. What Allah is saying is that when it comes to your religion, you have to be soft-toned, you have to be nice, you have to be gentle with the people. But realize, we do not ever bend our values. We do not bend our beliefs just to make people happy. In school, if you don't, let's say, support LGBTQ, and they ask you why, and you get made fun of, etc., of course, you're not criticizing the person. You're not going to tell them, you're not going to put like a poster on it and have their face on it and, just say that this person is going to hell. No, that's the opposite. What it means is that when someone asks us this question, how do you feel about this subject? We're honest. And we're not too worried about how the person will feel about it afterwards. Of course, we have to be as nice as possible. But even the best human being ever on this planet had people who hated him. So do you not think that people are going to say things back to us? As I said earlier in the khutbah, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, the people who are not lost are people who believe. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and they do good for themselves, their families, their friends, they're good people. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and they counsel one another the truth, and they counsel one another of patience. And the reason I mention this to you is because in Surah Al-Qamar, Allah talks about the punishments of many nations that have come before. But when it comes to the punishment of Prophet Lut alayhi salam's nation, Allah says their punishment was doubled. And in those very verses, we learn that the angels first came to Ibrahim alayhi salam's house before they went to Lut alayhi salam's nation. And so the angels came, and what happened in that dialogue? Ibrahim alayhi salam, he does what? He debates with them. And he tries to tell the angels, don't destroy the nation, save as many people as you can, maybe they'll turn around, etc. But it's amazing that the angels went to him before they went to the nation. And this is a lesson for us, that the punishment of Allah, we know it's already in the Quran. This is not something that we need to hide. You can find this on Google, read Surah Al-Qamar. But when it comes to us, we must follow the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. That yes, if somebody's making a mistake, we don't ask for their devastation. That is not who we are. We do not publicly ridicule people. We do not embarrass them. That should never be our tone. We should always try to help them in understanding our values, not supporting their agenda just to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and to educate us in any of our shortcomings. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ولكم. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Just to conclude, for those of you who weren't here in the beginning, we spoke about something very important, and that's about how the LGBTQ curriculum is being taught in schools today, and it's being taught from kindergarten to second grade. There are certain requirements that students must learn, and then at each stage of their education, that they must, be exposed to this certain type of sexual orientation. What does it mean to be, a man, woman, etc. And I gave examples of the gender-bread person, right? The gender-queer unicorn. And so the reason I want to re-emphasize this is that parents must be informed of what's going on in their children's educational systems. It's not as though we're talking about pregnancy or drugs anymore, where when I grew up, that was the problem, but they had a program against it called DARE, right? And they used to preach against it. Now this stuff is being, sent out, and it's being indoctrinated into our curriculums. So as parents, you must understand, one, first, what's going on. Number two, you must develop that open dialogue between you and your children. And number three, you must help them understand their identity, what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to be soft-hearted, but also we don't bend or we don't steer away from our values, because Allah has given us a straight path, right? Over the years, if you start to bend, if you take a line that's 1,000, miles long, and you change the angle of it just half a degree, you'll completely end up in a different continent. And so we must realize that our values have always stuck the same, and we must be proud of who we are. You are going to stick out, but Muslims have always stuck out. But that is who we follow, the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam, all the way from Adam alayhi salam to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to understand what's going on in our children's lives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to learn who we are and to be proud of who we are. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help our children, guide them, especially in moments where we're not there. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa aqim as-salah. And lastly, there's just a couple announcements. The first is that we're looking to start up the Parsippany High School Jumu'ah program again. So if you attend Parsippany Hills or high school, we encourage you to come up to myself or Brother Ahmed because we led the charge last year. And then lastly, we have donation boxes for funds for what's happening in Pakistan right now. So if you would like to donate, please do so.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Straighten your rows, shoulder to shoulder, and pray as though if it's your last. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما أبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.